This is Spice, and that's brown sugar, and Eric in the middle, and he's in the middle today. And we're live from Las Vegas in our Cuban Heritage Foundation office. So I want to hand it off to Eric today. He's going to tell us what it is that we're going to be discussing.
Well, one thing we're going to be discussing is something that we have seen quite a bit of in Spanish language media at this point, or in local Miami media, but unfortunately has not been given all that much attention in English language spaces apart from that. So basically what happened was an organization burned a communist flag on American soil, and 2 people got arrested for burning a communist flag on American soil. Now, to give you some more context, I'm going to give you a brief timeline of the events. We have already talked once or twice about a man named Carlos Lasso, who is, at least in his words, an educator who has lived in Seattle and now is very active in Miami right now. So this story begins in the middle of July. In July, Carlos Lasso took a group of 40 students, some of their parents, and their teachers to Cuba. During this time, Carlos Lasso and company visited President Diaz-Canel, the communist president of Cuba. I could not confirm from news sources, but according to some people I talked to who are active in the Miami area, he met with Diaz-Canel at least 3 times, and he certainly did celebrate July 26, which is the Cuban Communist Revolution's holiday. That's the day that Fidel Castro landed in Cuba in 1953, and it's celebrated as sort of their communist day of independence. What I also heard was that Lucius Walker's daughter happened to be present. Lucius Walker is a pastor in New York, and he's in communist circles most famous for being injured by the Contras in Nicaragua. A little bit more about that later. And we also know from tweets there that Diaz-Canel shared that on several occasions, on several occasions in several places, they posed as a group with 26 Julio, or 26th of July flags, which are communist flags. Can we show an example of these flags, please?
Basically, those flags are known communist type symbols. And I think that what Eric's trying to get at here is that these people are communist sympathizers, and they don't really believe in a free Cuba.
Right. So on July 31st, after Puentes de Amor, after Carlos Lasso and his group came back to the United States, Puentes de Amor staged a caravan, followed by a protest in Coral Gables at 901 Ponce de Leon. There was a counter-protest attended by a large number of Cuban Americans, larger than the Puentes de Amor protest, I might add, by appearances, and things got heated. And there's a very good article. It's in Spanish, but I wanted to give a little shout out to contrapodernews.com. Contrapodernews.com. It's an outfit that's run by Venezuelan Americans. One of them is Esteban Hernandez, and the other one is Jose Colina, I want to say. And Esteban Hernandez actually was there during the events on July 31st. So for that reason, I want to shout out for some great journalism on his part. At any rate, the reason why these people got heated was because Puentes de Amor brought a 26 de Julio flag, 26th of July flag, to the protest, which is a communist flag of the Cuban Revolution, as we already stated. And according to people who were there, soon after they displayed this flag, leaders from Puentes de Amor came over and asked them to put it away. Now, why do you think it was so important to put this flag away?
Well, of course. I mean, whenever you have something like that that gives away who these people are, they're not going to be wanting to expose like that.
Exactly. It seems it's one thing if the president of Cuba posts in Spanish that all these people are showing this flag. But it's quite a different thing if it's actually being shown on American soil. Now, at some point during this rally, during the counter-protester rally, though, one man brought alcohol, and he also brought a 26 de Julio flag of his own. And the alcohol was in order to douse this flag. And after this point, two other men, their names are Fernando Iran Rodriguez and Humberto Fernandez Seriocha, according to contrapodernews.com, burned this flag. And this flag burned for less than a minute. One person actually said 13 seconds, quite an exact number, I'd actually say.
Wow.
Nevertheless, Coral Gables police came and arrested the man who actually lit the flag on fire. And then the other man, in the process of peacefully and nonviolently trying to prevent the arrest, he had his hands behind his back, from what I've been told. He tried to block police officers and he got arrested as a result. All that Coral Gables police was able to say directly was, no, you weren't arrested for directly burning a flag. That's your constitutional right. But apart from that, there was no real information given as to their arrest until these people's bail were posted and they were released to their families again. And according to Martha Bueno, she asked the police why they arrested the name, and yeah, she pretty much said to me that even their families didn't know what the charges were until they were released. Concurrently, at the same time, after the caravan, there were some people for Puentes de Amor protesting at Miami International Airport. Now, I want to make it clear, these people had already asked for permission, and that's why they were allowed to protest, but counter-protesters were not. Some Cuban and Venezuelan exiles actually showed up to confront Puentes de Amor because they were technically on private property and they were not given permission. They were told to leave. So following this incident, Senator Marco Rubio called upon the FBI to investigate Carlos Lasso and Puentes de Amor on suspicion of collusion with the Cuban government. And we'll talk about that a little bit more at length later, but it's relevant because there are a couple of articles that have been circulated on English language sources. Coral Gables mayor responded to the incident on Twitter, saying that while he abhorred Puentes de Amor's message, he was for free speech, although he stands with political prisoners and activists fighting for a free Cuba. And this story ends with a little bit of a positive, even funny result for our side. The week before August 28th, from what I've heard, Puentes de Amor does something like this on the last Sunday of every single month. Puentes de Amor announced they would stage another protest in Coral Gables at the exact same location at last time. And again, local Cuban Americans also planned a counter-protest. So a very interesting thing that happened was 3 counter-protesters decided to camp on the side of the street that Puentes de Amor had occupied the last time, which had a lot better shade. And as a result, Puentes de Amor, which showed up late being 6 a.m. that morning, were forced to take the other side. And this time, their numbers were much, much less. Puentes de Amor also protested at Miami City Hall that day, and while there was a little drama there, apparently a man in a mask came and showed a obscene gesture to a bunch of people. This protest was peaceful and also without incident. And I would like to inform you that all the resources, should you like to look up on this story, some of them are in Spanish and others are in English, but we are keeping the links to this and to other references in our discussion today in the description of this video.
Anyway, I want to interject a little bit about Puentes de Amor. Puentes de Amor was developed in what I call a little bit of a disguise. Carlos Lasso, being an instructor, did what they do best, which is poison the minds of those in our universities. He continuously blamed the U.S. embargo for what the Castro regime has done to the Cuban people inside of the island. even though he knows for a fact that Cuba has the capability of spending cash dollars for just about anything that they need to purchase and buy from the United States. But therefore, it's a lot easier for Carlos Lasso and for the Cuban government to work together to misinform not just students, but misinform Americans. And this is exactly why we are doing this podcast. Americans need to understand the truth about the embargo and the truth about Puentes de Amor. Puentes de Amor means bridges of love.
What a farce.
A few years ago, there was actually a song created about a bridge, about how great it would be to have that bridge between Florida and Cuba, where people would be free to come and go as they please. And yes, indeed, that would be wonderful, but the Cuban government makes it impossible.
And it's very important to discuss this topic and to discuss this in English too, because even some right of center outlets like the Cato Institute have adopted this narrative that ending the embargo would be a good idea. And I believe, at least in part, it's because Carlos Lasso has been so effective ever since his 2007 Senate testimony with spreading this propaganda. He has presented a very convincing picture, and it's a smart picture. And I want to make it very clear that not every single English-speaking voice that says we should lift the embargo means wrong. However, I will state that all these voices are basing stuff off of wrong information. So they either don't know or they are just absolutely lying, per Marco Rubio's 2021 testimony.
Yeah. As far as the investigation by the FBI with regards to Carlos Lasso and Puentes de Amor, we really don't know how effective that is going to be, or if they even really care. They might perhaps just see it as exercising of freedom of speech and information, and not necessarily thinking about whether or not it's misinformation.
Yeah.
What is going on. So, there's this continuous talk about fake news, and fake news is exactly what Carlos Lasso does with the American people. Carlos Lasso has a direct connection with the current administration, and I think that the more that people like him organized, and it's very important to talk about how organized he truly is. He's very, very well organized. He's got a lot of followers and a lot of people that are buying his story.
And he doesn't just have a connection with the U.S. administration, to be clear.
No.
I had a almost default response to say which one. I mean, he has a very direct.
I know, that's what I was thinking as well, Eric.
Yeah, he's very friendly with Diaz-Canel. Like I said, one of our sources, and I wasn't able to confirm this online, says that Carlos Lasso met with Diaz-Canel at least 3 times, and Diaz-Canel, in not one but 2 tweets, has thanked Puentes de Amor.
Yeah, as recently as 2 days ago, Diaz-Canel actually was thanking Carlos Lasso for his incredible work of uplifting the Cuban voice against the embargo.
And the tweets that I've looked at these tweets. The tweets that we're talking about, at least some of them, are in the description of this video again, so you can go and see this for yourself. We understand that a lot of the claims we're making may seem a bit extreme, but trust me, they're well researched.
So a lot of what we're seeing is this misinformation, basically propaganda, is what is happening when you have somebody that is a partner with the Castro regime, the same Castro regime that, by the way, is imprisoning people, torturing people, and withholding food and all kinds of services from their citizens inside of Cuba. And yet they're purporting that if we lift the embargo, magically everything will be solved. And I think that Americans in general need to understand that although we have an embargo, Canada doesn't have an embargo, and a lot of other foreign nations do not. So the Cuban people have access to all that tourism, which brings money to the island. But unfortunately, the Cuban people are not the recipients of that kind of an economy.
Yes, but let's also dive a little bit more into Carlos Lasso. Per his 2007 testimony, he claims he served a year in Cuban prison for trying to escape in 1988, and afterwards, 3 years later, he escaped to the United States in 1991, leaving behind his 2 sons. According to him, also, in 2000, he enlisted in the Washington National Guard. 2003, he was mobilized to Iraq and arrived in 2004. And according to him, during his R&R time in 2004, he flew to Miami with the intent of flying to Havana, but the government imposed restrictions so he couldn't see his family. Now, what's up with that?
It's very, very simple. It's called infiltration.
Yes.
He was totally trained to do what he has done by the Castro regime during his time in Cuba. And therefore, he's only carrying a mission.
Yeah, and
that's what he's doing.
And I think it's very important to also understand that, sometimes Americans, when they're involved in espionage in other countries, may come up with similar types of narratives. Just because somebody is claiming they're a victim of the government and they're in this country does not mean they are a foreign asset. Now, I want to make this very clear. This is opinion. My personal opinion is that Carlos Lasso is probably a foreign asset, and it seems like that's the opinion shared here by Brown Sugar and Spice.
Absolutely. That is definitely my opinion.
Well, when someone buddies up to the Castro regime, an oppressive, murdering, torturing regime, you have to wonder what their motivations are. And to have a president of a current sitting president of a Castro regime, which is oppressive like it is, tweeting about you is pretty obvious to me that you're somehow colluding with the enemy.
Now, he's qualified this by saying that he's met with Rafael Diaz-Balart in response to Marco Rubio's response to the protests, mind you. He said he's met with a lot of people who we would consider anti-communist and against the regime. And you know what, to be fair, just because he's met with Diaz-Canel does not necessarily mean that he is pro-communism. But if he actually did meet with Diaz-Canel 3 times, take the trouble to send
I beg to disagree, Eric. I really beg to disagree.
Hold on.
Anybody that holds a July 26th flag is a burning hot red communist. I'm sorry. On that day, innocent people were killed. Innocent people were killed for an evil, horrible revolution.
So go ahead and tell people, because you know what? Americans may not even understand what July 26th was about. I do.
On that day, they killed people, Batista's soldiers that were lying on a hospital bed that could not defend themselves. That is what they celebrate on July 26th. So Carlos Lasso and anybody else that brings out that flag, that black and red evil flag of July 26th, is definitely a communist. And it's definitely pro-Castro, and it's definitely pro the destruction of Cuba.
And this black and red flag, let's also clarify, it's not just a Cuban communist flag.
No.
Basically anywhere in Latin America and even beyond, for example, Angola has a flag that's very reminiscent, and from my research is derivative of the July 26th. They still use this flag today. On top of that, you have the Sandinista flag, the ELN flag, one of the leftist groups in Colombia. And well, the M19 flag doesn't follow the color schema. It also follows some of the stylistic elements. There's a variant of the flag that goes M-26-7 instead of 26 Julio, like most of the flags are. It follows that stylism.
Well, and all of those flags are basically following the same ideals of one individual. His name is Fidel Castro.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all it is. All of those countries that you have just mentioned, Castro has had his hands, his brains, everything in all of those countries.
It's really tempting to think that Cuba, which is it's a big country for the Caribbean, but it's in comparison to the United States or Mexico or Colombia, other countries like that, it's considered small, but it's important to understand that the Cuban communists have had a unusually and unprecedentedly large impact on the area. They are very precocious. They have worked very hard to push their propaganda, and they're still doing that. They're very well known to have taken part in Angola's Marxist revolution.
Yep.
They are behind a lot of the narco-terrorism, and we'll talk about that a lot more and in a lot more detail in the future.
If you talk to the Nicaraguan young soldiers, they were trained by communist soldiers and leaders. So a lot of the turmoil that we've seen in South America, Central America, has been fathered by Cuba and its regime. And the thing that we have to note is Cuba was a satellite of what? The USSR. And believe me, they took their job seriously. They wanted to spread communism everywhere, and they were successful. So for someone to come here and say that they only want the things that are good for Cuba, when Cuba's regime has had such an awful impact throughout the globe, that person is a persona that I don't want to walk behind.
Yeah, according to Marco Rubio's testimony last year, there are basically three things, and correct me because this is not in the comments, by the way, but it is around on the internet. You can very easily find it on YouTube. There are basically three requirements: free and fair elections. What are the other ones?
It's free. It's basically pretty much that.
Well, free and fair elections.
They want the regime to go away, and they want elections. Those are the primary prerequisites for lifting the embargo. You give up. You establish democracy in Cuba. You have free elections, and we'll lift the embargo.
I would also say privatize Gaesa should be a condition too. But that's
Gaesa.
another conversation for another time.
Let me explain the whole situation behind the embargo. As a lot of people know, because last year we had the uprising on July the 11th, and a lot of people indicate that, besides COVID and besides the economy and a lot of the things that were going on, one of the catalysts for the explosion of the youth that took to the streets that day was a song called Patria y Vida, okay, which means motherland and life. Well, in Cuba, their big theme is totally the contrary. It's motherland and death, okay, or motherland or death, better said. And
he's also been shown, by the way, not to interrupt you, but he's also been shown with banners with that slogan on there too.
Exactly. And it's very important for people to understand that if this administration or the next were to turn around and lift the embargo without Cuba having met any of the prerequisites that the United States has in place, they will have indeed succeeded, because they have endured what in their brains they think is 63 years of abuse from the United States, not what is really happening, which is abuse by the Castro regime. So it's very important for Americans to understand that there is zero reason for the United States to lift an embargo on a regime that has in essence destroyed their people over an ideal, because this is exactly what it is. It's their brain, their experiment. Their experiment has been for 63 years to see just how much a human being can endure. How much hunger can they take? How much humiliation can they take? How much terror can they take? These people are scared from the time they're little kids. of anything that could be viewed as an authority. So you could have 100 Cubans in the street, one cop come and beat the living daylights out of something, and the only thing that you're going to see Cubans is pick up the phone and videotape what's happening, but no one will dare go and defend the poor kid that is being stomped, that is being beaten up, and then they stick him in a car and they disappear him. So the brainwashing is so strong. The terror imposed in people's lives is so strong. You know, we have Americans. I've had Americans say to me, well, Maria, you know, if these people didn't like their regime, you know, why don't they overthrow the Castro regime? I've had that asked to me by Americans many, many, many times. Americans need to understand a couple of things. There's very basic things that a totalitarian regime does in order to destroy the will of people. Number one, disarm them. Any country that is disarmed is lost. And number two, keep them hungry. The minute that food starts disappearing, they are in control. You depend on them to survive, okay? They have a system called the libreta, the little notebook, which is kind of the equivalent to our food stamps, let's say, for a lack of a better word. Let's say that the libreta is the food stamps, okay? If all you have access to is $100 worth of food for the entire month, and you know you have a job that pays you the equivalent to $20 a month, and a box of cereal is $11, what are you going to do? Because you obviously require more than $100 a month to eat. Every human being does. Therefore, you have a problem. You are relying on a system, on a government that has control over your mere existence. So lifting the embargo on this evil is not the solution by any means. So what this gentleman, Mr. Lasso, is doing is inviting people, American people, to become the accomplices of the Castro regime. And we should be better than that.
In an ideal world, there should be no embargo and there should be no dictatorship. It can't be one or the other. But now I wanted to ask you, and you said why a lot of Americans ask, why don't the Cubans just uprise? Didn't they choose? And or another variation, well, not exactly a variation, but something similar is, well, Cuba chose to be communist, didn't they? So I want to ask a question, and let's withhold reactions until I'm actually done. Ron Paul has said in the past that using embargoes are effectively an act of war. And that's why the United States, in the spirit of not being interventionist, should not be taking part in embargoes or setting embargoes. I'm not saying this is an opinion I believe with, but this is a very common opinion in the liberty community. Why does that not necessarily apply here?
Because an embargo, a commercial embargo, which is what we have upon Cuba, is something that it's very clear. The only thing that we are not doing with Cuba is giving them credit. You cannot give a bandit credit. Cuba owes every single country in the world money. They never pay their debts.
Apparently they import something like over 5 billion a year, but they only export about 1.2 billion worth of products a year.
Well,
now
we're their number one.
Yeah.
We're the number one importers into Cuba right now.
Yes.
Okay, number one, and they're buying cash. They're
Of
buying
chicken,
they're
medicine.
whatever they need. You have to remember the embargo is only for the Cuban people. It's being imposed inside the island to the Cuban people. But the Castro regime has money to bring up beautiful 4 and 5-star hotels for the tourists. They would love for the Americans to come. Our message is always going to be, don't go.
Please don't go.
Because they are building all these beautiful hotels and some of the most beautiful beaches in the world, which Cuba has, that only the tourists can enjoy. So for the tourists, there's food, there's electricity, there's medicine, there is anything that the tourist needs.
But that's a facade, Maria, because I think that we as American citizens need to understand that the infrastructure of that country is so rotten and so corrupted that if they were to have a major fire like we had in Las Vegas at the MGM Grand in 1980, which engulfed an entire beautiful building, they don't have firefighters or the equipment, and they don't have a way to keep Americans safe.
Well, they don't
And
even
I
keep
think-
the buildings
No,
up.
they
They
don't.
can't even keep the
They
buildings up.
can't keep up their own buildings. So what you're going is to a complete facade, and Americans need to understand that if they were to go there as tourists, it might be a huge gamble.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're,
it's
you're going
dangerous.
at your own risk.
Yeah.
It's important to understand that, you see, a lot of Americans, and I think Westerners in general, view Cuba as sort of a time machine.
A museum.
A time machine or a museum to the 1950s. And it certainly is a time machine and a museum, but it's more like a time machine and a museum to the 1850s than the 1950s. You have no infrastructure. People are burning coal now with the rolling blackouts. And, well, the main difference is you probably ate a little bit better in the 1850s.
Probably because you can grow your own food.
Well,
Yeah.
You can't do that
but,
now.
but here's the situation, because, going back to Carlos Lasso, when Carlos Lasso is sharing, this lift the embargo, he fails to tell people that basically the Castro regime has destroyed just about every single industry Cuba ever developed. I mean, the tobacco industry was huge in Cuba. I mean, Cuban cigars were something that everybody around the world wanted. It's not that way anymore. We exported sugar, to just about every country in the world.
Cuba exported
Yeah.
sugar, you mean?
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I'm saying. I'm talking about Cuba. And that's not the case anymore. They don't
No.
even have salt, and they're on an island.
They're on an island surrounded by fish, but they're not allowed to fish. And they're on an island surrounded by seawater, and
They're not allowed to get the salt from the seawater either.
So he fails to share with the American people everything that the Cuban people cannot do or do not have access to because of the regime. It has nothing to do with the embargo. The embargo has not stopped Spain from investing millions and millions and millions of dollars in Cuba. The embargo has not stopped Mexico from investing millions and millions and millions of dollars, or Canada, who the vast majority of the people going into Cuba as tourists are Canadians, Italians,
Spanish.
the Spanish, people from Mexico. And all of these countries have one thing in common. They've all had to forgive the debt that Cuba has had with them. The European Union gave them, I believe it was something like $10 billion or something. I don't know the exact figure, so please don't hold me to it, but it was a lot of money in order for them to invest in infrastructure. It never happened. What happened to that money? Puff, it disappeared like the magic dragon.
And it's a really good warning to people who think they want to invest in companies that are involved with communist governments. Even China is no exception to this, honestly thinking. We're not going to dive too deep into that, but, people have been left high and dry when they've invested in China before.
Well, I'm sure that Carlos Lasso has not informed Americans that the Cuban government owes so much money to China that China has actually taken Cuba to court in January. There's going to be a court hearing over monies owed to them. And believe me, the Chinese do not mess around.
No.
You're going to see the results of that. And unfortunately, they are just selling the island little by little to all these people that they owe money to.
At any rate, speaking of China, the reason why we thought it was so important to bring up the anti-embargo movement, and specifically Carlos Lasso, is because in a lot of English language media, we hear stories about Eric Swalwell and Fong Fong's relationship. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it really isn't a conspiracy. It's not that hard to imagine that countries that ideologically are opposed to us have agents on U.S. soil.
Yep.
Fong Fong's an example in China, and China tends to live a lot more rent-free in our head, and we don't pay attention to Cuba. But the point I want to stress is not all people who are working for the Cuban government are working in exactly the same way. Carlos Lasso is definitely trying to engage English-speaking people, and this, by the way, is if you happen to be a Cuban American who speaks English and is confident about this, it's important not to share your story just in Spanish. It's important to share it in English too,
Very
because
important.
otherwise you're not going to get people like me, who is not Cuban, on your side. But on the other hand, the other thing is too, there are other people who are from Cuba who have different goals and different paths. Carlos Lasso's mission in the United States, in my humble opinion, is of an English language propagandist in the United States.
His other mission is to make sure that the Cuban government stays in power for another 63 years.
Yes, again, we want to lift the embargo, but the cart must not pull the horse. Cuba, privatize your industries, hold free elections, have fair press, and release the prisoners, and then we can talk. That's my opinion.
And
Nothing less than that.
My opinion is that will never happen. Dictatorships have to be overthrown. That is what needs to happen in Cuba. They are not going to voluntarily go anywhere. They enjoy what they're doing. They're enjoying amassing their fortunes, taking everything that belongs to the Cuban people and just spreading it amongst their different family members. So they're not just going to go. They have to be overthrown. And the concept that under no reason the United States would want to invade Cuba is one that is extremely puzzling to me. Khrushchev and Kennedy are both dead, and therefore let's call them treaties between one another, should have also died with them the day that they both passed away, because what the United States has allowed was not only the destruction of an island and 11 million people, they have also allowed the spread of all of this garbage that is going on throughout all of Latin America
and Africa and a lot of
other countries. Exactly. And basically, why do we need this experiment done to human beings in our hemisphere is something that is beyond my comprehension, because the United States stands for bravery, for freedom. How can we have an island 90 miles away from American shores endure this kind of abuse, this kind of terror for 63 years, and we should sit back and watch it happen, or not even care that it's happening? Why don't we care about our immediate neighbors? Why do we care about saving people that are in Europe or somewhere else that has nothing to do with our immediate culture, with our immediate surroundings?
And not just that, Maria, because if we're really honest with each other, the crisis that we have right now at our border, with people coming here illegally, with people that are trying to get out of these regimes that are caused by the Castro regime, you know what? The chicken isn't too far from the coop.
And
Well-
this seems to me to actually be an absolute perfect segue. We were going to talk about another thing on this podcast, and this specifically has to do with knowing who our neighbors are and knowing what problems are happening there and why are they trying to come into the United States.
Yeah. Why do they come? Well, I will begin by telling you that the concept that they're coming here because of climate change is absolutely ridiculous.
And outrageous. I mean, really?
Climate change has affected the entire world. It's not a phenomena to the Western Hemisphere. It's happened all over the world. It's a little hotter. We have a few more hurricanes, or we have drought. We have situations, but that's not why people leave. People do not leave for those reasons. I have yet, and I'm going to say something that is going to bother people on the right and on the left, but I'm going to call it as I see it. I have yet to see one U.S. congressman or senator or anybody even running for office going to the border and speaking to one of those people and asking them, why are you coming? Why? Everybody isn't coming just because they want a job. The vast majority of the people that are coming will tell you that they're coming because life is becoming impossible in their countries. When people migrate, it speaks to the damage being done by their leaders, by corruption, by cartels, by drugs, by this power grab. You have it, not just in Cuba, not just in Venezuela. You have it in Nicaragua. You have it in countries now like Colombia, which is sad.
Chile
Very sad.
is also starting
You
to.
have it in Peru.
Chile, Peru. I mean, it has spread like a cancer, and people are scared. And, you know, it's very difficult to grasp how people are willing to risk their lives, because people are willing to risk their lives literally. It's not now just, getting on the beast. I don't know if all our viewers know what the beast is. Please look it up on the internet. It's the train from hell that people climb onto.
Google the Beast train.
It'll be there.
While it's running, people are climbing on this train to get here. People are 70, 80 people stuck all at one time inside of a box truck to come here. People are coming through jungles. People are dying on the rivers. People are being killed for $200. Men are having their wives raped in front of them.
Or even themselves too.
You know,
or their
Don't forget MS-13.
So, for us to just not think about these things also speaks to our conscience. What is happening to the conscience of the American people? You need to not just think with your head, but touch your heart and understand that right now, this is not just about a job. This is about survival. This is about people's lives being turned into sheer garbage by their leaders that only care about taking as much as they can for themselves and leaving the people disarmed and hungry. Remember, that's always going to be the common denominator: disarmed and hungry. Mexico is becoming unbearable to cross. And it's very sad. That's our immediate neighbor, a neighbor that we share so many things with. But right now, it's being just completely ran by cartels.
And an effective government too.
And the government and the police. The police, may I say, is just as corrupt as the cartels.
I want to also state too, specifically with regards to Mexico, as somebody who reads independent Spanish language media from Mexico as well, that all these people who have concerns about cities like New York, Philadelphia, San Francisco with the lawlessness and the homelessness and all these politicians who navel gaze or who put their attention to something else that's totally irrelevant to the people's safety or economic well-being. The exact same thing is happening in Mexico too at this time. You have a president who is calling delinquents, criminals, the most human of all humans. You have his probable successor, Claudia Sheinbaum, who on a day that I want to say 18 women were murdered, and it was an absolute horror and travesty, and the entire media was horrified by it. Same day, no mention of it, posted a picture of 2 palm trees. The exact same things that are ailing our worst cities are happening in Mexico here too. So it's not just important to learn about these societies, to have empathy for people who live in other countries who have nothing to do with you. The point I'm trying to make is these people are fighting the exact same fight that you're fighting. And they also depend on you being free and helping them to become free once more.
We have to be stronger. We have
Absolutely.
to keep the rule of law. And if we don't, then these people will suffer maybe even more than we've suffered.
Well, we're not even respecting our own rule of law.
No.
I mean, that just kind of has magically disappeared. And, I don't know if most of you have had an opportunity to watch in the news the last couple of days. We've had 13 people died drowning at the Rio Grande, and another 5 died, I believe, yesterday. People are dying, okay? People in the United States are dying with fentanyl. The lovely Chinese, they love us so much that, the fentanyl is coming right across the border, made in China, designed to kill the American people. But somehow our politicians on the right and on the left have decided that this is not important.
No, going after your doctor for writing pain pills is much more important. Excuse my sarcasm. Fentanyl is a lovely, potent drug. In the hands of an anesthesiologist like myself, it is wonderful for our surgical patients. But because it is so potent, it is also extremely dangerous in the wrong hands. And these politicians seem to want to put a Band-Aid on that. The problem that we have is that human sex and drug trafficking cartels make a huge amount of money and find a way of funneling that money into our political campaigns. And until we open up our eyes to the fact that what we've done is enable this kind of corruption, I don't think we're going to be able to solve it.
Yes, and I think it's also very important at this point to point out, because we have definitely annoyed both conservatives and liberals at this point, that any given administration, you're going to have people on the right talking about how the person on the left who's in charge is ineffective and is just letting everybody in. And then at the same time, you're going to have some leftists, and by leftists, I don't mean what colloquially on the Blaze or on the Daily Wire or on Fox News is called the left. I mean people who are at Jimmy Dore level of leftism and to the left of that, calling people like, for example, Barack Obama, the deporter in chief. And I think we can learn one very critical thing about this. No administration, let me say it again, no administration actually wants to solve any of the problems at the border.
Exactly.
It's more important to them to use it as a way to justify being reelected, whether it's by, being humanitarian and letting people in, which never really actually happens, by the way.
No.
Well, until now, apparently, in all the wrong ways.
That's importing slavery.
Exactly.
Cheap,
and that's
cheap
what we have to
labor.
admit.
Or on the right, securing the borders, which actually never happens. The reason why we had so many problems, and you read all these stories about Trump locking people in cages, and that's somewhat true, even if it's charged language. But what people never pay attention to is that this happened during the Obama administration. It happened so much during the Bush administration. And nobody seems to be paying attention to why it's happening more and more and more. It's definitely happening in the Biden administration too. And one reason why I'm pro border reform, I am not an open borders person myself. I do think we have a right to national sovereignty, but that being said, we need to have a solution that responds to the crisis, A, and B, is humane. And neither of those things, regardless of administration, have been happening.
But Eric, it's not even, restructuring the border. It's about immigration reform. No one wants it. The politicians don't want it. The American people want immigration reform. The American employers like myself, we need immigration reform. We need to be able to hire workers that are skilled to do some of the things that Americans don't want to do for whatever reason. But the way that things are happening right now it's the wrong way of handling life for American citizens, and it's most certainly the wrong way to handle things for our immediate neighbors that are living in desperate conditions. They are literally dying. We hear a lot about how many are coming through. We are not hearing about those that don't make it here. And believe me, there are a lot of people that don't make it here. There are a lot of people that die in the Darien Straits. There's a lot of people that die in the jungles of Colombia. People are dying. This is dangerous. This is not a game. This is not about climate change.
Nope.
This is about politics. This is about tyranny. This is about communism taking heed in Latin America. And we have to be better than that.
And I would like to propose something else because we want to provide solutions. You know what my proposed solution is? Make a sane, transparent immigration policy that doesn't make it such that you have to wade through a lot of information, possibly have to go through the trouble of getting it translated for yourself. I had a conversation a few months back, it might have even been a year ago, with a remote coworker, who immigrated to Canada from the Central African Republic. And you know what he actually told me? He said, the reason why I wanted to go to the United States, the reason why I went to Canada was, to be totally honest, the rules for immigration in Canada are just clearer and easier to understand. And this is somebody who wanted to immigrate legally, yeah. Mind you. He wasn't going to immigrate illegally, and he wanted to go through a sane policy. He just wanted to go to a better place that would let him in.
Well, the problem too with the people that run our embassies and our consulate is, and I'm saying it because this is something I have witnessed with my own two eyes, and I'm going to be very honest and very fair. I have actually visited a consulate with a Mexican national that absolutely qualified to the core to be given a visa to come to the United States. The agent that saw her took the sheet, went like this, and said, come back next year, after taking their money. And this person qualified in everything to come into the United States. That's another reason why they're coming illegally.
Yes, when you don't have hope, and when you come from a place where the rule of law is not respected, even by the leaders,
yeah.
Don't be surprised when people start breaking the law. That's why I say make a clear policy and provide hope. And some stories I've read on Latinos and have been backed up by some media, even in the United States, claimed that when the Ukraine crisis started, there were a bunch of people who were in Tijuana, and some of these people were Ukrainians, others were Belarusians and Russians. And you know what happened? Ukrainians were pretty much waved straight through, but the Russians and the Belarusians, now who knows if their claims were valid or not? That's a separate issue, but they were not even being considered.
Well, what about the Haitians? Under this administration, we've had over 70,000 Haitians deported. Why?
Mexico too.
Haiti is a hellhole. That's what it is. People are desperate. We have done nothing. Nothing. Not the American people. The American people are very giving. The American people are kind. The American people are generous. We as a country have done nothing to help stabilize that country. They needed our help. They couldn't do it alone. They needed our help. We have failed miserably with our foreign policy with regards to our hemisphere. Failed miserably. We on our next podcast next week on Saturday at 3:00, because we stated all of the problems, but this is going to be a different podcast. We are going to come back to you and we're going to tell you how we see solutions to these problems. We are going to bring that to you.
And in the meantime, American people understand that the government is corrupt on the one hand, and on the other hand, understand that the solution is not to be woke, but to be better neighbors to countries that have ideological similarities to us at their founding, if not at present.
From the studios of the Cuban Heritage Foundation, Spice, Brown Sugar, Eric in the middle, we thank you so much for spending this time with us today, and we'll see you next Saturday at 3 p.m. Patria y Vida.
We look forward to you.
Okay.
Thank